Hello again. Hello. So we have water, we have spirits, and we hope with the spirits to keep the spirits high in relation also to this film. So as you know by now, I mean, here at the Woche der Kritik, we're trying to push the boundaries of what is normally considered acceptable cinema, what it's supposed to be and how it's supposed to be made and how it's supposed to be written and how it's supposed to be presented and so on. And this film, Magic Skin, is very much a point in case. Because if you bring this film, the script, I don't know how it worked, maybe Kostas can explain it how it worked, but pretty much in this film there is everything that no commissioning editor, sound commissioning editor would ever accept. They would say, you can do that, the audience doesn't get it, how many characters are there, I mean, you have to stick to a mood, either it's a comedy or it's a drama or it's social commentary. So basically, they are trying to pinhole or to typify what you can do or you are not supposed to do with cinema. And this is why we decided to call this panel Delight and Delusion, because there's also a pleasure in pushing the boundaries. And there's also the delusion of what people think it's acceptable behavior, not only in cinema, but in art. And if we look at how art impacts on our daily life and how it's commodified over and over again, and how artists struggle to get out of this trap of being commodified all the time. So the issue is there still a room, a place, a way in order to break all this preconceived notion and run a bit amok with the possibilities of creativity and challenging the audience to follow films, theater, music, whatever it is, on uncharted paths. So, Kostas, I would begin with you and...
No.
It does work.
Look, what I was thinking when you were speaking now about if there is room for something which is against the preconceived rules, I was thinking that it's not supposed to be rules written on stone. I mean, even in the very small history of cinema, which is something like 100-something years old, what I think it's the rules we're talking about, it's some kind of politics or habits which are very, very young and very, very recent. I mean, if we're seeing, I mean, we see a gesture, we see something that somebody does, even in the life, and very often we have to put it in to check if it is a positive gesture or a negative gesture. Even in the moment you talk about the rules, we're talking either in a negative way or about an act of resistance. But even an act of resistance, we have to define it like something larger than a negative gesture. I mean, even if we identify the act of resistance with something which is only against, I think we are condemned to follow the rule and to have the impression it was always like that, which isn't the case. I mean, it's very poor. What the room you're talking about, it's a little room in the history of art and humanity. It's very, very small. In the same time, of course, very powerful because it's a capital. And the capital in an economic way, in a way of everyday life. But we have to keep remembering that it's a very small percentage of what human can do. I would say just.
Let's take a step back. If I'm not mistaken, you were a critic yourself. And how did you, first of all, there's two questions in one. As a critic, what were you looking for when you were watching other people's films, and where and how did you push, promote certain works, and what did you eventually pen? And when you decided to make the big step behind the camera, what were the motives of this choice? And obviously you were already aware of what it meant to be on the other side of the barricade, so to speak, or there were challenges and things that you were not expecting at all?
Of course there were. I mean, you cannot be aware. You cannot be aware of what it is to be on the other side of the behind the camera. And even now I'm not aware, and we will never be aware. But to begin from your first question, it was pre-decided when I worked as a critic that I want to make films. I mean, it was more like the young first parallel step, because I was already nourished by the culture or everything I had read about the Nouvelle Vague, or the critics who became cineasts, or the cineasts who had already done their first steps in criticism. And I was nourished by a mythology of writing loving letters to cinema or directing through words. In the everyday routine of it, it was not as magical as I wanted it to be. And of course, this one of the reasons for this was this very, very little room you mentioned. And when you don't have the initiative to create something, I mean, you work for a journal, for a site, you see the films, you watch the films that are now produced, or you have to go to the festival and just write something very, very quickly to publish it. I know, there's a whole system where this creativity of big text, huge text, another dialogue, and another creating another basis, like it used to be, much more than nowadays. It was very restrained, and plus to that, I didn't gain any important money, so it would be an argument. So I mean, very, very quickly, I abandoned it as a habit to write critics. Well, quickly, it took 10 years, but I mean, I wanted more than that to be.
So making films was a kind of making film was kind of getting rid of the habit of being a critic. So filmmaking as a rehab from critic.
But vice versa, because already there was this, I don't know who said it from the Nouvelle Vague, that we write like directors and we direct like critics. It was Godard, I think. And there was already an imaginary very, very present in my first youth, that we have to do this. And I mean, in the whole extent of what is writing or speaking, what is, a text, and how a film is a text anyway. So not only, it was not two very separate things, because the whole idea of a film like a text was already present in my mind, and it was perpetually interacting with my thoughts, my experiences from cinema, from life. So still, it is. I mean, I think by watching Magic Skin, I think one of the dimensions we could evoke or not is how it plays with cinema, or how can one be critic, or pose the question, what is cinema through a film? Which could be, which has to be always the question for a critic as well as a director.
Before we switch to our other friends, you mentioning mythology of film criticism, in which we all grew up, and mythology of films, but this film is extremely interesting because it goes against the grain of everything that is mythological in cinema. There is not this passive reverential attitude towards cinema. It feels like you are literally aggressing both the process of making a film than what cinema is supposed to mean today. It feels like an act of guerrilla against the notion of filmmaking, the fact that the actors are playing all the time over the top, and at a certain point they're almost playing as if they are rehearsing in the film how their over the top acting should be, and the fact that the film itself reflects the process of the filmmaking, and it becomes in a way as a social commentary on Greek today and so on. So I mean, this extremely complex machine of contradictory meanings that you have put into being, a machine that sometimes seems almost to have a life on its own, and that we continue to call film for lack of better word. How did you work as a critic, filmmaker, or filmmaker/critic, or cultural activist on deconstructing what is the mythology of cinema?
If you catch it as a point of reference, the keyword mythology.
Yes, of course.
This is very interesting. I don't know if I can evoke it without now doing something like a monologue for hours. I mean, like it's like going to the couch, saying how, because of course it's very present. There is a mythology, which is the mythology of the book of Balzac already. And
who
the whole
was,
notion of
who was an extremely important author for the guys of the Nouvelle Vague and so on.
Of course, and Rivette, whom I admire very, very much. This was more of another coincidence, as far as I know. I mean, some consciously, I don't know how it happened. It was another coincidence who brought me to direct this. But I think when I'm watching again, for instance, now a film of Rivette, I can't stop thinking that it was, I mean, it was something like communicating with these guys without even knowing it when I decided to do this book, or to communicate with this book. After this, what is, I mean, about mythology, I would like also to give the microphone to the others so it can be more, I mean, so it doesn't get into a monologue about my mythology or how this machine works. Because the one thing I could say just to begin is that of course there is a machine. I mean, the film as a machine, and desire as a machine. I mean, if it was a first ambition, how to speak or how to show all this thing. I mean, how to put this content of the mythology of desire, which is the book, how to put it into form. It would be something like that, something that always searches its form. A machine that all the time tries to not to be broken, it breaks, it transforms itself so that we have to continue with it. I mean, a body that all the times it breaks, it does a rehearsal, but the rehearsal, in the same time, it's always the acting. We see the rehearsal, we see the acting, we see how the form loses itself, it fights again, and you continue. I mean, as a gesture, I described the first schematic thing that there is in my mind, if you ask me this.
And how did you react to the film, Devika, as a film critic?
Okay, I have something kind of complicated I want to say, so let me go through this one by one. But I think maybe one of the things that is delightful about the film, or one of the sources of pleasure in the film, is that, and this obviously comes from the source text itself, is that it's this, the characters and especially the protagonist is wrangling with a constant existential choice, right? So the choice between like desire and sustenance and longevity and gain, and so every single thing that he does is fraught with this existential choice, and that is agonizing, but it's also pleasurable. And I mean, there is pleasure in existential rumination, even though you know it's circular and self-contained and doesn't lead anywhere, but the act is pleasurable. And I think what you were saying about, you know, the film going against the grain and breaking rules, to me, it's not really about rules, it's more about choices. And how I perceive of more traditional film is that it precludes the possibility of choice in spectatorship. And I think this film, like at the level of the text, but also at the level of of viewing it forces you to constantly make choices, even as a viewer, and kind of constantly not just choose between what you're interpreting, but also sometimes choose whether, you know, whether you desire the film in some ways, you know, and it's exhausting sometimes to watch, so the character's choice of choosing between desire and sustenance becomes sometimes your choice, and it's, do you want to watch this, and kind of choosing what you're getting out of it. And to me, that is what is really engaging about the film, and it's in that way that it feels untraditional, and in that way that it feels, like you said, like a constantly self-reinventing machine, as opposed to a text, I would say, in fact. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it makes totally sense in terms of if you would have written about it, would you have written in exactly those terms, or would you have used some disclaimer for the, let's say, average movie-going public in terms of you are in for a trip, a heady trip, or viewers beware, this might be...
No, and I think that maybe has to do with my background too, because I think categories like traditional cinema, camp, whatever, over-the-top acting, they're very culturally informed. And so, you know, when you say, even when we say that this film is going against the grain, whatever the grain we're referring to is a very culturally specific grain, right? And
yes, of course.
Right. So at least for me, especially, is, you know, someone has had a kind of a transatlantic life and interested in global film culture, like that isn't how I would approach the film. And so again, to me, it really feels like this is how I describe it is how I would.
No, absolutely. What I was trying to say is that sometimes we use these words for lack of better choices, lack of better words, and especially for the fact that programming section like the Critics Week or something is in itself an act of film criticism, because you make certain choices. And I do think that in relation to what is film criticism becoming, in the sense that on newspapers where film criticism used to happen as a form of almost literary art form, how writing about cinema in a newspaper, it's starting to disappear. So we have these big gaps between academic essays or very quick notes about 3 stars, 4 stars, no stars at all. So, and programming has become the act of criticism. And sometimes sidebars such as the Critics Week in Berlin or in Venice, they struggle to exist side by side with the festivals that become bigger and bigger. I would say Delusion. And whereas the delight to be still with the possibilities of risking something in an art form. This is why I was saying this I was using this antinomy of so-called tradition or expression against the grain, because if you look at the possibilities that the programmers of the main competitions in the bigger festivals allow themselves, it still plays only in the field of narrative. 3 acts, narrative, psychological, be it social oriented content or psychological, but it's still narrative. So it seems that as a film has already exhausted its possibilities. This is why I was trying to, and therefore I think it's important that programming has become a kind of act of criticism in itself towards the festival, kind of counter programming as promoting different possibilities.
No, I think that's a really good point, and I do think the like excessive categorization that comes with exhibiting film and in these kinds of forums, I guess you're right that it does exhaust the possibilities of the film, and I think maybe what it takes away is the focus on the experience of the film. I mean, just our ability to isolate our experience of viewing a film, and I think that is something that this film constantly redraws your attention to, is the very present experience of watching it, of processing it, and maybe you're right. I think if it was programmed differently, it might be presented with certain disclaimers that might get in the way of that. But I think there is something built into the text that maybe works against that as well. I mean, even if it was programmed in one of those outre, just some kind of sections that already signal to a viewer that this was going to be outlandish, I think there is maybe something built into the text that constantly makes the viewer think about the present act of experiencing the film, questioning the film, making choices in the film.
Antonin, Devika has a point when she says that the film, as it is conceived by Kostas, it reminds you all the time that you are watching and you are supposed to watch, and the film itself is a kind of reflection on how you build something that asks to be watched, and while it does, it asks the viewer, why are you watching and why are you coming along? As a filmmaker, how do you relate to this kind of construction, visual, but also intellectual construction?
I like... no. Okay, sorry. When I'm writing a script, sometimes I like very much to have a certain relationship with the audience, in fact, and write sometimes it's private joke or something that people in a movie theater will realize that they are in a movie theater. I like that because I think a movie is like a mirror, so a reflection with the mirror, and so you don't know which part is the real one, because in fact when you are looking at you in the mirror, you see your image. Your image is false, but in fact it's real because it's you. And I think a movie, it's a kind of mirror that you can find in circus or things like that, that you, in fact, the miroir déformant.
The deformed
deforming,
mirror,
yes,
the cracked
yes,
mirror.
A movie is deforming the reality. So, but when you are making the movie, of course, what is very strange that the thing that you wrote, which were false, become real because you are doing it. And I think that when you are calling the people in the movie theater, they are going to be a part of your movie, in fact. And I like that, and that's why maybe I am doing some comedies, because what I do in the screen, in fact, will go in the audience. The feeling, the laughing, and well, I don't know if I'm very clear, but
No, you are indeed very clear, but this is an interesting point, because now we have gone from the act of watching to the act of the position of the audience. And I would like to ask you, both filmmakers, there is a certain kind of resistance on the part of the so-called quotation marks audience to become part of the game. Sometimes it feels as if the audience literally asks to be kept separate from what is on the screen, like, let's keep the wall where it is and don't get us too close. So how do you relate to that when you feel that sometimes the audience actually asks to be something different, that the audience likes to be in what Debord used to call la dimension du spectacle. So we have to keep the reality of something that it's not real, the show, and therefore we need to have this wall that is the audience.
I don't know the name in English, which is ludique.
Playful.
Playful, yes, yes. I like playful art, but of course, playful art is a kind of what you ask something to the audience, and the audience is okay for that. Of course, sometimes people really don't like that. So maybe that's why sometimes people don't like my movies, because they really want to be like a neutral audience, not a part of the movie. I like also because maybe it's a kind of the way that I make movies to as sometimes I put some music not as strong as you did, but this kind of music is a signal for the audience to take it and to shake it. I think it's a way what you wanted, I imagine, maybe, to shake a little bit the audience when you put very hard music like that. And well, it's a way of when you create your movie, I think that you have to think about it at the very first beginning when you write the script. How I will consider the audience for my movie. So at the very first of beginning, I think it's very, very important to think about that, because that will give a color to the movie. And you have to know if you want to be a bit more like in the more common. Yes, if you want to make a movie, how do you say, mainstream movie? Yes, and or not mainstream movie. And if you want to make a mainstream movie, you have to know that some things are forbidden. But well, it's your choice after. I mean, the filmmaker choice to make a mainstream or not mainstream, which doesn't mean that it's bad or good. It's just a way of making a movie.
Finally, I would get to Susanne, and I apologize for getting so late to Susanne. As a person working with theater, there is a strategy that Kostas adopted in the film, whereas the frame seems to become all the time like a theater scene. It's the form of the frame is always challenged either by the cross fades where the characters multiplies and you can see his interiority, him becoming schizophrenic in front of the eyes, but also the extent of the shots almost evoking a theater-like immersive collective experience. So while watching the film, what did you perceive about the way that he transformed this story from the Magic Skin, Balzac and all this, and how did you relate to the spatial, the way that he used space in the film, space and bodies, obviously?
Yeah, it's I went through different temperatures. I have to say, so there was a bit of irritation because I couldn't get in, and then there was also some kind of that I perceived the freedom. Also because the acting is playing such a big role, so you're constantly busy with the acting, but you see the actors or the characters being so free in it, going so far in that kind of playfulness where you're kind of envious because you can't follow, but they're going there, so you're left behind. But they're like children in a way, they just go for it. where you yourself would think, I could never go there, in a way. I wouldn't dare to go there. And you perceive yourself in so that opens up a space, which is, of course, a different space that you were asking about. But I was very busy with that. And because, so you get a kind of, I got a kind of envy of the freedom of the characters or the actors or you, I don't even know. So that opened up something which I found very interesting, because I was also searching for which reality am I now watching, or is there ever a space where they let go of that kind of acting or reality, and there's something underneath that I can discover and that tells me, shows me the way, but you can never find it, which is also very fascinating, because it's a kind of search through this labyrinth, in a way, of people. And so that was very interesting. The scene where the actors were rehearsing, that felt, I was like, oh, is this the real reality they're showing now? And then going back, so back and forth. But that for me opens up a space in the sense that you question your own reality. So it's not just a film about a film or filmmaking for me, but it's, I think if you would watch any scene in real life and put it on stage or on film just like that, it would be completely absurd.
I
So
totally agree with you.
yes,
Totally.
so we have codes in how people seem to be in reality and in film, which are just that, codes. And people are much more strange or weird or whatever you want to call it than we think. So in a sense, maybe this was very, very realistic and not absurd at all. So yeah.
But this is exactly one of the main things. I mean, the last thing you mentioned, and it's a great pleasure also to hear somebody mention it, because it's realism with Harris, for example, with whom we constructed his acting and on whom he is based. And for him, because he's also a theater actor and a theater director, for him as well, and for me, it's a main concern. I mean, the realism. One of our inside jokes, but not only a joke, was that we make a realistic movie. Yeah. But we meant it. I mean, the quest for realism, that we are in realism. And my personal belief is that every artistic code is a quest for realism and nothing else. I mean, if you're not searching for realism, you're not searching for anything. I can imagine a surrealist saying, my quest is surrealism. No, he's searching I mean,
of course, yeah.
Truth.
Yes.
Let's say like that. So it's every artist is a realist in this way. So after this, the whole thing about what is real. I mean, the real pleasure. If you see somebody in front of you having real pleasure, I think even in life we are envious of. I mean, either we want to confess it or not. I mean, the children, the drug addicts, the animals, somebody who is having sex and we can participate. I mean, the classical pleasures. If we eating, watching somebody eating and having pleasure, it's always disgusting and ridiculous, and it provokes at the same time an envy. So yes, of course. I mean, if you see something real, at the time there is real pleasure, and this is where it becomes ridiculous. I mean, where it makes us say, what is that? What is that you're making? I mean, we can't all the time, like now we're discussing, we can't really have pleasure. I mean, we're castrated in order to talk.
I didn't realize that. Oh gosh.
Yes, I'm telling you.
Oh, now it's getting awkward. No, but I have to play here a little bit devil's advocate, because we are evoking, almost in a Louis Buñuel way, the phantom of liberty, the phantom of freedom. But since your film has this extremely precise construction that pretends to be somehow devoid of any construction, where does the construction become, and this is deliberately provocative towards you as creators, and also when does this deliberate act of creation become an act of control, and thus also a kind of authoritarianism towards, because you want to say something in a very precise way, you use the means of cinema because you want to achieve a certain degree of freedom, but in order to do that, you have to force your way through saying something and doing something in an extremely precise way, which can be the opposite of freedom. I hope I made myself.
You are, but I think that we can play with examples. I mean,
yes, let's do that.
Since we begin about that, I'm not saying that it isn't truth, or I don't see where are you going, but using examples would be a lot more fun, because when this is a group work, and in an artist's work, even in another artistic form which is not the cinematographic, when you're trying to get to some situations, it's very ambiguous then. I mean, you're exposing something which is really ambiguous. For instance, let's say an example. For me, in every audience I have seen seeing the film, they never laugh at the same moment, for example. Since you mentioned laughing, they never laugh. I mean, it's the right moments for them, but it's never the same moment, never. So automatically it becomes, I mean, you control something in order to lose control.
No, what I was trying to get at is that sometimes when we do something, there are films that at a certain, and it's not because this happens with you. I just wanted to engage in a discussion, because sometimes you have directors that control so thoroughly the matter of their work. They're so precise. They're so conscious about what they want to say that they don't create works of art. They create blocks of concrete where all the doors and windows are shut, and where you can only sit and contemplate the work. Whereas the more interesting thing is creators, artists, whatever, that instead of creating something that is perfectly locked, they sabotage their own work in order to create some escapes, manholes, windows, fake doors, in order to allow the viewer to deconstruct through the experience of watching something, the work itself.
I like, so one more thing, and then I can let the other speak. I like the architectural, I mean, imaginary, like seeing a film as a building or a construction. In this way, for me, the intention from the beginning was really to play with this and have lots of fake walls, fake doors, lots of reflections. I mean, lots of reflection, so it can become also lots of reflections like the mirrors, where we can lose each other and see each other again. Of course, it's a very premeditated architecture in order to do that. But it risks inside to really lose somebody in the way forever, or detest me if somebody falls off fake, comment on dit, for fake ground. I mean, somebody can step on a fake ground. I mean, always, or in a silence, do a strange noise, whatever. It is premeditated to be like that. But as as somebody who constructs in the same time, there are some strategies in order to already in the shooting to create things which are limits even for us not to know what we are doing. I mean, it's one thing to premeditate the shooting list or to work really, really hard on how this machine will work and break and work and break. And then again, there are moments when you don't know how it breaks. I mean, it breaks in a way when it becomes ambiguous for you, and you have to follow it.
Susanne grabbed the mic, so I'm very curious.
No, I just wanted to say that thinking you have control is an illusion. I mean, I don't think it works that way. And everyone thinks that he does have or she has the control is delusional. For me, I find it doesn't work this way. And if you think you have to have control over everything, you're going to be very unhappy. So there's a great amount of happiness and freedom to let go of that control and see where the work itself takes you. Because my experience is that you don't know. You cannot know, otherwise you shouldn't make it. So there is a part of yourself that has to get lost in the work of art you're making. And that's the most important part, that you do not know what part of you is getting lost. And it can be a very big part. And the happier you get, the more you get lost. So that's, I think, the equation, how it works.
Yes, for me, when I started to make shorts at the beginning, I was a bit unhappy also because, as you said, because the movie was not exactly what I thought. Yes, and so after I learned to do with what the life and everything could bring to the movie. For example, if you want some blue sky and you have some rain, sometimes you must shoot because it's a lot of money. Everything, you know. So you have to have an idea, or a lot of ideas to make with it. So that's, I think, the great filmmakers, they know how to do with the reality, which is not like they wanted. And I think that is the most exciting thing for me when I am shooting a movie. That what does the real life will bring to the script? And also it's like the scene that you have in your movie. What will the actors will bring to the movie? For example, when we see different actors who are doing the same scene, then we can realize what can different people can transform a movie, and how what a movie can become with different actors. And that is very important when you make choice. Sometimes you want an actor and he doesn't want to come in your movie, so you have to imagine all the movie with another person. Yes, it's not that will be your movie, but it was not you know. And also after, for technical things, for me, I try to have some technical mistakes in the movie, but I organize these mistakes. For example, I don't take en français, in French it's script girl, but
Continuity.
yeah, continuity. I don't take continuity, so I do it by myself, but I know that it won't be as good as if there were a continuity person. So I organize some mistakes sometimes, but I know that I will have that kind of mistakes, and that the way that I try to not have all the control of the reality.
And before opening the discussion with the rest of the floor, but Devika, and how do we as film critics relate to the issue of control and freedom? I mean, it's not that easy to get your point across while writing as William Burroughs and Naked Lunch and invoking the same freedom as the object we contemplate while writing.
Do you mean to say?
Yeah, I mean, as film critics, do we like more filmmakers that present us completed objects or stuff that we need more to work on or with.
Right. I think every time I write about a film like this, or a film that feels uncategorizable or broken in productive ways, I feel guilty, because I feel like the act of writing about it is like tyrannical. It's, you know, it's like trying to just put down what the film is when it's maybe impossible to do that. And sometimes that's a job and you have to do it. I think I wanted to go back to something you said, what you said about seeing these characters in this hyperrealism and feeling maybe envious. And I actually didn't feel envious. I felt embarrassed, like a secondhand embarrassment. And I was thinking about that emotion or that sensation I felt, and I thought it was similar to, you know, when you record yourself and you listen to yourself. That's how I felt while watching most of the film. And I think it's because when you do that, you hear, or sometimes when you see yourself on your laptop screen when you're not intending to, and you see parts of yourself that don't conform with your self-image, that exist but you don't believe they exist, or you don't want them to exist. And in a way, like, I mean, I think not control, but liberation is like defined against something, right? There is no such thing as just pure liberation. It's always liberation from something. And I don't necessarily think that your film is like uncontrolled or loses control, but I think it kind of forces us to like confront the fact that we actually cannot control our self in the way we control our self-image. And it kind of takes us to those points. And coming back to the question of writing, I don't know if that's possible to convey in writing, because writing is constantly an act of creating a self-image. Whatever you're writing about, you're creating an image of yourself in your words and an image of your experience. And I feel like, yeah, creating an image is that kind of total act. And when something reminds us that that act is not total and that something can escape that, that's this kind of discomforting feeling of liberation that's also very troubling. So I don't know, I guess I'm just trying to say it's a difficult film to write about without feeling...
Can I say something about it? Yeah, I mean, even now we're creating a self-image, of course. And the most difficult part, or even, I don't know if it's the purpose most of the times, it's not to create a self-image, to forget what we're doing. And I'm thinking this about writing, but even about making a film, which is, par excellence, most often, or as the law of making it, is making a self-image. The directed by, I mean, it's a reflection, your reflection, I made this film. So I was wondering, and this goes necessarily most to the directors, because you mentioned about the mistakes, how you make mistakes and you leave a door open for the mistakes. One thing we had all the time in mind with the actors, and we're trying to be there, was this range of mistake. I mean, how direct a scene, how to go through a scene, for example, or a sequence or a group of scenes, being too close to the mistake. I don't know how present is this in your mind, but one of the things which was very, very present in how to work with the actors was in order to go to this embarrassment and to remember the self-image, in order to forget it, was to be very, very close to the range of play it badly, or be very, very close to the mistake, not doing the right thing in order for the scene to go to the end. I don't know if you...
But that's... I mean, then define mistake. I mean, that's a whole discussion in itself. But because the moment, because of course I can very much relate to what you're saying, the kind of embarrassment. I also felt that, or irritation. But then perceiving the actors or characters, it's a strange mixture. Going into that space and not being busy with it anymore. So that kind of, so there was no mistake. There was no mistake possible anymore, because once you forget that, you can do anything you want. I had the feeling you can just, I don't know, be be an act in any kind of way. It's us outside watching it who cannot follow will feel that way. So in that sense, there was no, it's and that's when you see children acting, I think, not just playing but acting. They're not like good actors in that sense. So but they just do it. They don't care. I mean, it's not so. And there was that kind of quality to it, and that's, I never thought about it in that way. So I think I have to keep thinking about it. It's so difficult to talk about it right after. I mean, it's crazy this, but it's
doing it right after just to evoke other mistakes.
Yeah.
So and create more spaces of freedom.
exactly.
Antonin?
Well, to talk about mistakes, of course, when I said mistakes, that was mistakes that the audience couldn't see, because.
So they're not real mistakes.
Yes, it's false one. No, for example, for in a movie, I wanted some beautiful weather, and I had some rain. So, well, that's difficult because you have to do with it. So. Fortunately, I thought about what could I do if I will have some rain tomorrow. So, for example, I went to some different shops and I bought some umbrellas, colored umbrellas, red.
Colored umbrellas remind me something?
Yes. Red, yellow, blue. Okay. So, okay, it's raining. We use the colored umbrella because if you use, well, you have to be in a certain aesthetic, of course. But if you use black umbrellas, like everybody in our life, in fact, it will be awful in your movie because you won't see the faces, and everything will be gray or black or brown, and well, not so good for your movie. But if you have suddenly some colors in your frame, so of course everybody will think about Jacques Demy, of course, and so they will think, and people will think, okay, he wanted to do that. In fact, you're just in the big shit because you have some rain. So you have to find a solution to make it as if
You were
yes. So sometimes it's that kind of mistake, you know, of you have to do with what you have. In fact, so you have to find the best idea. And so, of course, the audience won't see that you want it, in fact, good weather. But when you will see your movie, maybe each time you will be like that. No, I don't want to see this scene, but in fact, maybe it's a good one. So we can't control, but we try to control everything.
We pretend to control.
Yeah, we pretend, in fact.
Oh, I was just going to add that that's such a good point, because I think that is also sometimes a predicament for critics. Is you know, a critic watching a movie would immediately write that as a reference to Demy, right? And so just this kind of assuming, writing about movies like these is it's very hard to avoid the pitfall of assuming an intentionality, or assuming that you are mining the subconscious of the filmmaker in some way. So, you know, you'd say, it was a practical decision, But a critic might say you think it was a practical decision, but like in your mind you've absorbed.
Yeah, actually you were
Yes.
scouting the weather forecast, like thinking to avoid the rain, but you were looking exactly for the rain because you wanted to reference the me, and you didn't want to admit that to yourself. So
Yes,
Still might
also.
be the case. I mean, would still might be the case.
Oh, yeah, of course. I
Because
mean,
why do we care? I mean, and,
yeah,
which
it was
way
an
do we care?
incredibly Mephistophelian scheme on his part to finally be allowed to reference the me.
Yeah, yeah.
Please, feel free to chip in. Yes.
So is there a wrong way to see the film? Because you're all talking about allowing mistakes. Thank you. Hey, thank you for this. Super interesting. You're all talking about allowing mistakes to happen as a maker, to intentionally construct and deconstruct something, to leave open gaps. But you also talk about how this film is programmed in a certain way. There's also an intentionality, how a critic can write about it or not write about it. So is there also in your idea a wrong way to see this film, or can you make mistakes as a viewer?
Wait, I don't think in your mind it's one question or two.
It's maybe it's two, but mostly can the viewer while watching this film make similar mistakes that you just described?
I don't. I mean, in real life, if we talk even now, you can talk to me about your way of seeing the film, and immediately I will have a lot of thoughts about where there will be demons of he sees it in a totally mistaken way, or he didn't see anything, and at the same time a stream of thoughts trying to catch something from what you say, and it will be judged all the time. I mean, it won't be necessarily, oh, you have the wrong way to see something, because we can't imagine, I mean, what could be the wrong way in life to see somebody or something. But in the same time, we recognize that there is no wrong way. It's always this subjectivity of you have your way. But in the same time, we know that life isn't this. All the time, we say that you're not bearing justice to me. You're not bearing justice to my film. You're not totally present. You forget me. You forget something. You don't see me, so I'm invisible, and it goes like that. So of course, my wish is that the film is totally visible. But even this is, for me, okay, with a question mark. I mean, I don't know. I don't know.
Okay, thank you.
Questions? I can just raise your hand, don't be shy, obviously. And there are no mistaken questions. We can ask anything.
Can I ask a question to Kostas?
Okay, you're breaking the script here. Go. You're
Breaking-
going off
breaking
script.
the fourth
Okay.
wall. I just wanted to ask you, because you sidestepped that question earlier about why you chose to adapt this text. And I was just wondering what you think the visual medium would add conceptually to this text.
First of all, I don't know, you have read the book. And it's not that it is totally important if you have read it or not, but for sure, it's not a classical adaptation. I mean, it's not an adaptation of the text. Finally, it would be more something where the point of reference or the point very, very early in the beginning was this book by Balzac. So if it's an adaptation, it would be like the way we do an opera out of a book, or even a show or a spectacle, something which is an evolution and a transformation of something which I found radically important for me at the time, which was the whole question of desire. I mean, these pacts with the devil, which was very, very common in the literature of the time. I think but it can be used like a child's toy. I mean, like a gimme, create a lot of other situations. And this is how I try to imagine it. I mean, in a more modern way, or without the whole classical thing of the pact with the devil and whole. Or it could be one of the situations, one of the ways to stage it. Now, I don't know if this already answers your question, but yes, of course, the whole thing and the whole question of desire was very central. I remember that in the time being, it was my producer Fedra who had proposed me the book. I read it very, very quickly. I searched something to do, something to write very, very quickly. And I think that I read the book, it was an instant decision, and that I had one of the first images that haunted me was a fact that I read somewhere that it was the very last book Freud read in his life, when he had cancer and he shrunk because of the cancer, because it was a cancer that was incurable and had made out of him something like the skin in Balzac's book. So this whole sense of how it was very tragic to read this book while we were dying and shrinking, and how he had the sense of humor in order to do that, I think it really put a filter on my reading of the book. This just small fact, and why Freud, I mean, just trying to investigate, but something like a subject. I mean, it was going on and it transformed it onto other questions, more or less.
Yes, please. Just wait for the microphone a second.
Yeah, I got a question for you too. I'd like to ask, what was your intention about this love story? Because normally in films or movies, there's like this classic love story that shows like the two individuals that are getting together, and in your movie it wasn't like that. There was like almost always an ending that was pretty rough, I would say. And what was your intention about this to show in your movie?
What did you find not classical comparing to what you define as a love story?
I'd say it has some endings that are not, it's some unrational endings. It's not this kind of love that always shown in these movies. It's not like this kind of love that is just there. It's almost like an unrational love. It shows you
like I mean,
yeah, but
already talking about a love story which is rational, it's very boring. I
yeah,
mean, life.
No,
so
true. But what is your attention about it? What is your main point of it?
It wasn't, of course, first of all, making a point out of love seems to me the most contradictory thing in the world. Yeah. I mean, you cannot imagine to make a point out of love, and this could be one of the points of the film. I mean, trying to survive in every door in your mind and your heart and your soul, the love opens. I don't know. It's labyrinthical. Then again, my wife told me that it's very much the structure of the love story. It's very much like Le Fragment d'un discours amoureux de Barthes.
Fragments of
a lover discourse of Barthes, which it doesn't mind, of course, if you don't know the essay. It's more or less fragments of love. Barthes knew very, very well that it is only through a fragmented way you can talk about love or reenact it. And as he was, I think, very much a drama queen in his writings, Barthes, I think he puts a very theatrical aspect in his essays. So I think she has reason. I mean, it is a fragmented discourse in this way, maybe.
Also, I just want to say it also, like, even though obviously it is untraditional, there's also elements of just classic melodrama, and that's what the Barthes comment also reminded me. And there's a way in which there's this operatic, tragic melodrama to it that feels quite, familiar also.
I agree. This is why I asked what is not classical in your impression, how you lived it, because in the same time, I think what holds the film together and what needs to be what is to be expected all the time is this love story. I mean, you can. I don't know. Even me, I can imagine the whole time making other things in the movie, taking other choices, not putting this, not putting that. This is horrible. This is not. But the choice of being around a love story was never put into question. Never. So already this is a classical choice. Already. I mean, it's one of the most classical genres, and a genre which gives space for all the others. In the same time, I don't know if it's a genre per se. What is it? A love story. What is a love story? And why it is so important here? It could be also a gender issue. I mean, it's more, for me, the most classical question is love and how two can live as one. I don't know. Or the one can transform into the other, which is what the hero says.
I would go to a more critics concerned question, if you don't mind. I mean, because your film is a far cry away from what we, with our limited knowledge of Greek cinema, perceive as the so-called Greek new wave of the recent year, this cold, almost Ulrich Seidel-esque domestic bourgeois drama with lots of nastiness going on in very detached and cold shots and so on. As a critic, you did something completely different. I can imagine that the film already is a commentary on what's been... No, I'm seeing.
No, I mean, I wouldn't ever make a film
no,
as
I
a
mean,
commentary on
no, of
Greek
course not,
wave.
but in the sense that what is your take and why did you go this kind of deliberate opposite way? I mean, also in terms of merely an economical thinking. Let's make a film in the mold of, it's more easily sellable, it's more easily presentable, and so on. So, I mean, you tried deliberately to cut off yourself and your work from what was perceived as quote-unquote Greek.
It was a decision, and everything we make is a decision, but it wasn't a major decision inside me. I mean, I don't wake and go to sleep with my relationship with the Greek weird wave. First of all, because there is no such thing as a Greek weird wave.
This is a funny thing about new waves. Each time you evoke one, there's someone that says there is
Yes,
no
of course.
such thing.
No, I mean, most of the directors of the Greek weird wave are the ones who are going to say this. There's no such thing as a Greek.
Of course.
I don't by far belong to it, but I still say it. There are some directors. There was one who made a huge success, and there were others that followed and tried to imitate for some recognizable reasons. So this is a wave. But I mean, there was no an artistic world like waves of people in cafes or in offices on the street who had the same visions, who wrote about them, who communicated, and who created waves of creation. This is the difference I make. In another way, yes, there is the Greek weird wave, that, like there is the festival wave, like there is the market wave. I mean, we live in waves which are totally familiar and recognizable. I mean, when we're talking about what are the festival choices, we're talking about waves, and already it should be shocking that we have to speak about something which is so new to the festivals. I mean, it shouldn't be the case. It shouldn't be the case. Maybe this is one decision which makes me revolt against something, saying that it shouldn't be the case, being too negative, as the thing you mentioned, that you have to be free from. We always imagine that we are just free, and then there is this thing which reminds you that you are free from something, from the waves. So in this whole world of waves, the Greek weird wave was not something major to me. We can talk about this as a wave of films, but...
Questions? We have a question up there.
So earlier you were talking about programming as a form of criticism, but there's also an act of programming that put you together on that table. And I was wondering for everyone else, but Kostas, who's here with his film, when you first saw the film, were you surprised you were asked to this panel, or what were your thoughts on that?
This is for me. Ah, okay.
I think for everybody except me.
Yeah, I mean, I was definitely surprised, just because it's so. I think usually panels are put together so that panelists have some kind of expertise or some cultural or some relation, and I don't believe I have any of really those with this film. But I think maybe that was an intentional choice. I don't know why I was invited, but I think that might have been an intentional choice because talking about waves, and when I saw this film the first time I saw it, this was not the first time I saw it, and I was taken up. I mean, it's very disarming the first time you watch it, and I think this has to do with especially watching cinema that's not from a culture you're overly familiar with, but also small cinemas, you know, countries that have like smaller cinemas, and the immediate foothold you look for is a wave, is some kind of, okay, who are the other Greek directors I know? Okay, what is some pattern I can clock this film into? And so that was my first impulse, and I think recognizing that impulse and then working against it to react to the film in some kind of original way, to really think about what I was feeling from moment to moment and not think about, okay, what framework does this film belong to? I think that was possible because I came to the material with not much preconceived knowledge or expertise, at least in my case. So I thought that was really productive, but I'd be curious to know, you know, about you guys.
Why are we here?
Or if you were surprised, or
well, I kind of know why I'm here, because it's the email I got said that I also work with actors in a specific way, so that was something that kind of connected me to the film, I think, because but I think I work with actors in the complete opposite way of what was shown here. It's so I was also kind of busy with that, because here it goes outside, the gestures go outside. It's very much this, and the way I work with actors is the complete opposite, which is very strange for theater, because in theater you have to do the grand gesture. So this was much more theatrical than what I do on stage, actually. So I'm looking much more for a kind of implosion, but how can you convey that even from a big stage towards an audience that goes way to the back? And so that's what I'm researching, or have been researching for the past years. And I work also in a very film-like manner, because I work with actors on stage who are actually playbacking. They are not talking with their own voices, so they use lip syncing. So we have a kind of text that is being played, and they just, so it's kind of like what you do in film in a different manner. And the sound was really also fascinating, how that worked here. I had the feeling how the sound is detached from the body, and you try to put it together, and it sort of doesn't, and it creates a space between the body and the sound. That also interests me. So, yeah.
For me, I think it's because in relation with the theme of the debate, which is delusion. I think maybe I have discovered the movie like you this night, and because the festival sent me a link to see the movie on internet, I started to watch it on my computer, but I stopped after 5 or 10 minutes, because I thought that it would be better to see it in a big screen because of very large shots, and I thought that I couldn't appreciate the movie on a very small screen. And also for the CinemaScope, well, it's for big screen, of course. It's not well. So I don't regret to have seen in a big screen, because at the in fact maybe it's I am opening a reflection about that, but I don't know if we can see the same kind of movies in a small screen and in a big screen. I don't think so. And I think that some are better in a big screen like this one. And I'm not sure I could watch it all the movie in only one time in a small screen. I think I would have to take 2 or 3 times to watch it, because it's it's not a mainstream movie, and it's a movie that you are disturbing, so it demands you have to give a lot of concentration to this movie. And where you are, when you are at home, well, you know, it's you have children and you have everything, and people are knocking at your door and everything, so you can't have a real concentration. And I think that movie theaters are very good for that, because you come to see something and to be concentrate to see something. I think it's very important. I think
it's very important. I mean, it's more important than ever. I mean, remembering that the cinema is the religion of the big screen, I think it's maybe okay, but it's very serious. I mean, it's even a political thing to remember that cinema is the religion of the big screen, and that the huge difference of not being at home, being at home literally and metaphorically. I mean, this being at home where this movie is smaller than you creates an image of yourself. No, the film is bigger than you. You have to be small. I mean, having to be small and not at home, for me, is the only reason to go to see a film. I mean, really the only reason. Not to be at home and to be small. If we are big and the movie is small, it's very weird. I mean, is any of your favorite films, in any sense, better in a small screen? For me, no. And then there is a range of films which work also on a small screen. I think the masterpieces, which both work everywhere, but most of the films only work on big screen. I mean, just to get to... But, as we speak about waves, political waves, today's cinema is made through waves of people who decide only from small screens. Only. I mean, everybody watches on a laptop, do its selection, and goes and go on.
This is an extremely interesting point, because nowadays when you do the selection, the pre-selection, you don't watch the DCPs. I mean, imagine how it would weigh on the budget of, okay, in order to be admitted to selection, you need to lock down the film, have a DCP, ship it over, the festival has to rent a cinema, and then how many DCPs you can watch in a day. I mean, you would have a festival every other 6 years.
You think this is the reason?
No. I think that films have a kind of biology, and the biology of films has changed. There are some films that you can experience on a small screen, and you know what's going on, and when you see it on the big screen, you realize that they also have been thought for a big screen, but it's the historical time frame that has changed. So therefore there are films that are biological, diversified. They can exist on different sizes of screen. And I'm going to make a very personal example. I have been invited to a festival in France, and I had to introduce Bertolucci's first feature film, before the revolution, which I'd only experienced only in television, home video, and so on. And I thought that that film was somehow its dimension, you know, the small screen. And they were showing this film in an opera house, transformed for the festival in a cinema screen. And when I watched Before the Revolution with the helicopter shots, and I was blown away. I had never seen that film. I had seen always another film, and they literally had to drag me out of the cinema because we had to do another panel and so on. I didn't want to leave because I had never seen it. And to this day, I say I've only seen 25 minutes of Before the Revolution because and the screen was giant screen, and you totally understood what they were doing with the camera. So I think that you are right, but still, cinema change like every other thing. And I think that today, the fact that film can be small, there's way more freedom than before. I mean, before the selection of who's got to make a film was precise or stronger, it was the Bressons. I mean, Bresson, in a very perverse way, already had figured that screens would be smaller in the future. Therefore, he put this extreme close-ups of hands, of details, of pockets, and because it was as if he was already exercising television by making his films in this extreme details to be shown on a giant screen. So I think that it's not about.
But how we can compare the giant hand which steals somebody in pickpocket with the hand you can see in a laptop? I mean, it's not the same thing.
Of course
it's not
not.
any visual information.
This is why I'm saying
hand.
that he was already exercising.
The giant heads, the giant eyes of Bresson.
Of course not. I'm not comparing.
It's as if we were saying that it's recognizable. Okay, we got the information, and of course we elaborate information because the machine, we're looking at the machine, so we're becoming the machine we look at. I mean, of course, a laptop it's built to send information. So
yes.
You can't see
of course,
only
but
information. You cannot see a film.
Unless you have, I mean, growing up as a cinephile in a small village, you don't have the cinematheque nearby. So, I mean, the first time I cried while watching Pickpocket, it was on the TV, and it was a small screen. So, but yes, what you say is because the shock of seeing those hands on a big screen, it's completely different from what we perceive now. So maybe we think we have seen, and this is another thing of delusion, maybe we think we have seen those films, but actually we haven't, because we haven't seen them the way they were supposed to be. So, questions? I heard someone clapping, maybe we should call it a night.
We have a question.
Just want to say thank you. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a beautiful
Thank you.
film. And thank you to these wonderful, marvelous actors. Very enjoyable, and it's going to give me a lot to think about. And I want to read the book now as well.
Really?
Thank you very much.
Okay, mission accomplished, Kostas. Wow.
Thank you.
So sorry, just one more question.
Where are you?
Here, in the corner,
okay.
in the
Okay.
back. I was just curious how the locations were chosen, and like a question to Kostas, how the locations were chosen and what they mean to you. And you know, like because of the ambiente, it's quite mundane. You know, you have this pool and you have the house and everything, the surrounding. Like, is it a how do you say, like you didn't have too much choice, like to take. You just took what you got, or it was very conscious?
Okay, first of all, generally for me the location scouting is like the other side of acting, of casting for acting. I mean, really. And in an emotional level and psychological level, it's like a tissue with two sides. And doing the location scouting is like doing the reverse thing from casting. and of the same importance. So it just, or this film at least, it would never be the case. I mean, the way it locations play, it's like actors play. About the house, okay, technically there was a problem. I mean, we did the film with very little money, and we had to rent the house to shoot for weeks. So it wasn't easy. But and it had to be a rich house. I mean, a house with many levels. We didn't really want to depict what is it to be rich in a rich house. We didn't want to do, I don't know, Wolf of Wall Street. But it had to be, you know, a multi-level house. So for me, it could be as well living enhancing the complexity of it. Living a film and a life which gets richer and richer, and being lost inside it. So yes, it had to have some aspects and have some certain dimensions. I'm very satisfied from this house. I don't know. I mean, even when I look at it, it's one of the things I find very positive. The choice of the house. I love it. Again.
Yeah, I also think it's a good choice. Yeah.
Well, thank you all for being here. Thank you to our friends, and we call it a night right now.